Institute of Family Studies, an organisation that sits within the Australian Public Service. Dr Ritu Parna Roy has worked with multiple transdisciplinary teams as a researcher in several institutes, including Te Pūnaha Matatini and the Public Policy Institute. Dr Casimir MacGregor is a senior social scientist and program leader of the Transition to a Zero Carbon Built Environment research program at BRANZ. And Dr Aimee Simpson works as a senior analyst in the Ministry of Social Development's Research and Evaluation Unit, where she conducts research to help inform policy and service delivery. Collectively, our speakers are here to help you understand real-world applications of sociological skills and knowledge, including specific skill sets that are beneficial in the workplace. After the presentations, we will have a 10-minute break, and then our speakers will share their CV and interview tips, followed by a Q&A session. Please do note down any questions that you might have for the Q&A so that we can ensure our speakers remain uninterrupted during their presentations. Once we move into Q&A, you can raise your hand, you can pop messages into the chat or privately message Eva. Please also remember your Zoom etiquette, so microphones on mute, cameras on if you wish. And lastly, we have begun recording for this session. One moment, sorry. Thank you again for joining us, and I would now like to welcome Dr. Luke Gahan.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here. I'm coming to you from South Australia across the water there, and I'm not in my usual house, so I'm just making sure that all my technology is working, so I apologise if something goes a little bit astray. And I was just saying to the others that I also have 2 cats wandering around very much awake today, so you'll probably see one jumping past or making a lot of noise. Thanks for having me here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your questions as well. I thought I might go through and talk about the skills that were there, but by running through what I've done since I completed my PhD on a bit of a sort of a journey, I guess. And while I was completing my PhD, and I'm assuming some of the people here today are probably in the middle of their PhD or at various stages or doing their masters, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get a lecturing position while completing my PhD. It was a 1-year maternity leave contract, so someone else went on maternity leave, not me, and I stepped in and did that role for a year. So that was a really great experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But then at the end of the year, the person came back to work, and I had to quickly finish the PhD, submit it, and then look for other work. And I'm sure you know, because I know it's the same in New Zealand, the sociology lecturing jobs are sort of few and far between. And so it was about looking broader to where and what I could do with my skills. So I'm just going to share some little some slides. Where is it? This one here. So I'm hoping you can see that now. Yep, awesome. Okay. So when my contract was over lecturing, I began looking for work at universities, as I said, but there really wasn't much available, particularly for people who have just finished their PhDs. So there's an abundance of people who apply for roles, as you would know, that have got lots of experience. So it was a little bit more tricky trying to get a role when you're fresh out of your PhD, even though I'd done that 1 year. So as I looked for a full-time job, I, in the background, started translating my PhD findings into seminars and workshops, which I then was able to deliver around Australia to key stakeholders. So my PhD, for those who aren't familiar, explored separation experiences of same-sex parents and post-separation parenting. And so I turned them into workshops and seminars for family law practitioners, family therapists, counsellors, etc. So to help them feel more confident working with same-sex parents, to get to understand the things they might need to do to change in their practice, and in turn deliver better services to people like my participants. The best thing I ever got to do was I actually ended up presenting to the family court, to a group of judges in the family court, and did a presentation on my findings. So It really started because I didn't have anything to do. So I started turning them into training sessions in case one day I got that opportunity. And then I started really networking and starting contacting people and saying, hey, would you like to be me to come along and just chat for free? And then very quickly, this turned into someone saying, hey, why don't you come and deliver a full day workshop and we'll pay you? So it seemed really complicated and daunting at the start. When they would ask me, how much would you charge to deliver a workshop? And I thought, well, I don't know. I've just been doing this for free for such a long time, presenting at conferences. And so I had to investigate that. And that was I used a lot of the research skills to work out how to navigate that. Then there was the added complication of navigating the Australian tax system and how you set that up. And I'm sure it's fairly similar in New Zealand. Here we set up and we become a sole trader and you get a business number. They call it an ABN here. And then you have to learn how to make invoices and send those out. So it was a bit difficult. I think creating the seminars and workshops was the easiest part. Working out how to do all that business side was quite different. It wasn't something that you'd picked up. But again, you had all those research skills. So I was able to work out how to do that. And working for yourself is really not something that comes easy for most people, but it was not something that I ever actually thought I would do. But by the end of my PhD, I wanted to do something with those findings rather than just publishing journal articles. And while it's probably not necessarily a sociology-specific skill, I think we pick up really valuable skills while doing our PhD, such as time management, communication, planning, and a little bit of entrepreneurship, I guess, that comes with the passion for the subject that you've been researching for years. So all of these things really help when working for yourself and translating your research findings. On the slide here, you'll see a little graphic of, I guess, just one of the workshops I did all the way over in West Australia, which was probably my favourite one to do, because it's from here to West Australia, it's about the same distance as here to New Zealand. So it was really great getting to meet all those family practitioners. And I also want to add in here, using your skills at communication, but turning them into media skills. And it's not always something you get. And some universities I know over here help PhD students do training on media skills. So keep a lookout for that sort of stuff. And maybe it's something SAANZ could do at the conference even. But it comes in handy because you're also, again, getting your research findings out. So I then got a contract around that time, and I was still doing that self-employment stuff around in my own time on weekends. But I got a contract at the National Ageing Research Institute in Victoria to work on several elder abuse and dementia projects. And they're a non-for-profit research organisation with charity status. So this was not just an organisation of sociologists. People there came from different academic and non-academic backgrounds. Some had clinical and science backgrounds, while others, like myself, had a social science background. I think a big skill there is learning how to demonstrate the rigour of qualitative research. So I'm a qualitative researcher, and I think sometimes we take for granted when we're doing presentations amongst our peers around how people understand qualitative research. So a big one is sample size. So, you do a presentation on, a sample size of 50 and people go, well, hang on, the last person just had a sample size of 5,000 in their quantitative work. And so learning how to do that. And I think a lot of us come out of our PhD knowing how to do that, but then turning that into how do you present that when you're in a space where not everyone's familiar with that work. The big leap from doing your PhD, working in an organisation like that, was that you're unlikely to be working on a project on your own. You're most likely going to be working as a wider team, unlike when you're doing your PhD. And not everyone will have a sociological background as yourself. So teamwork is something that doesn't always come naturally, I think, to academics straight out of their PhD, nor is interdisciplinary work. But as sociologists, I believe we are probably well placed in using our sociological imagination to embrace other fields and concepts and to understand and explain them in sociological ways. So from my experience, sociologists are often the link between the various fields. We're able to connect their different ideas and understandings together. So I think I often found myself in this role and in others linking psychologists to say gerontologists and even marketing people. So the photo here, by the way, was a very fun day with me out at a hospital in Melbourne, and we were promoting blood donation with hospital staff and talking to patients in the waiting room about blood donation. And of course, we're hanging out with Billy Blooddrop here, who has since been retired as a mascot, the poor thing. But I got a contract to work with Australian Red Cross Lifeblood, and it's an organisation in Australia that runs blood donation. And they have a big research and development arm, but really that's largely medical research. And inside there's a small group of people doing research on those who donate blood, and then a smaller little cohort that are doing mainly social research. And at the time, the group was doing some qualitative social research, and I came on to run a project to help understand barriers and facilitators to blood donation for ethnic minorities Australians. And the other research in the team largely had psychology backgrounds and looked at blood donation with a psychological lens. And so coming in as a sociologist, I think we can provide quite a unique perspective. Working there was different to the Ageing Research Institute because this organisation had a big marketing team who did marketing research. They had an innovation team who looked at innovations in the organisation, including right down to things like what couch do people prefer to donate on, what food do they like, all that sort of thing. So my role was to use really the sociological imagination to provide them with an understanding of why people did and didn't donate, what their experiences were, and what it was about in donation that prevented people from donating. And I did a presentation at SAANZ a couple of years ago on this. Again, the key skill was being able to translate what I found into something that could be communicated to and understood by those from other disciplines, but also in particular non-academic marketing people who don't live in a theory space, as well as senior managers, board directors, who want to know what the solutions are. So it's not just about what we found, you had to put it into really framed as what are the solutions and recommendations. So you could do a really big report and they'll flick straight through the section that says solutions and recommendations, and that's all they'll read. And that's pretty tough as an academic to know that no one's going to really read the juicy bits that you've, agonized over. I think as sociologists, we've got really good skills at being solutions focused and in knowing how to communicate our findings with different groups and getting to the bottom of what are the things that really need to change. Because we understand different groups, and I think we can understand change quite well. So we know how to present our research findings and solutions detached from theory. And I think that's quite important. Some of the other fields, I think, find it very hard to detach from theory, and you need to be able to do that when you're working, say, at a private business often. So importantly, learning how to write a business report. It's like writing a thesis sometimes, but it's not really. It's very different the way you communicate it. How to give a briefing to the board, and how you present your findings in meetings, in particular, again, qualitative research to non-researchers who aren't really interested in what your participants said, but they're interested in what you want them to do with this information. So in that job, the most important thing was research translation, and what do I think the organisation can do with what I found better? What can they do better? And then I guess working with various teams to see what they can do with it. And that was quite a different skill. So for example, I got them to develop an ethnic ancestry question for the organisation, and then I worked with the IT department on getting that perfected, something I never thought I'd use my skills to do. I don't have a slide here for my current role, but in my current role, I'm working on a few projects related to defence families, and I can't really go into detail on those projects, but the skills are very similar to those that I needed at Lifeblood. However, it's a public service role, so I really needed to shift away from writing for marketing departments and directors of an organisation to writing for government department heads, ministers and officials. And again, I think that sociologists can really do that well, because we can know our audience and we can give them the information in a way that that they can ensure that the work is heard, and we can make the biggest impact. So that's all from me. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Luke. I think you've got a lot of insights, and I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit more about them in our tips session, particularly, the fact that sociologists can understand and see change. I think that's really, really critical, particularly in the environment that we're in, where nothing is static at the moment. So I look forward to that a lot. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Ritu Parna Roy.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm just going to quickly share my slides. Can you see my slides now? Okay, cool. Great. All right, so I think unlike Luke, my background has been so far within academia. I haven't worked really outside of academia, but I think I have experience of working in different multidisciplinary research groups where people come from very different background. I have worked in a research team where I worked with mathematicians, computer scientists. So they come from very, very different background compared to us. And over the years working with those people and in those teams, what I sort of come to understand or learn is that when we think of what can we do with our sociology degree, we think about sociology in such a very narrow way, that what sociology could be used for, or how we could use and apply sociology in different aspects, different job, different career paths. And I have heard people saying that it's a theoretical discipline. It's the most common thing I have heard about sociology. That's it's theory heavy. I differ. I disagree. Yes, we learn a lot of theories in sociology from sociology, but I think we learn them to use as a tool to analyze and scrutinize social issues and social problem around us. So I think the first thing I'd like to do, ever in doubt, that what could you do with your sociology skills, or how could those skills be relevant to your desired jobs or career pathways, is to going back to the basic, just asking yourself, what is the one thing that you have learned from sociology, or what has it taught you as a discipline? I mean, we talk about sociology teaches us inequalities, power, conflict, functionalism. Luke was talking about sociological imagination, which is the foundational concept. All those things are very, very important and relevant to wide sort of different types of job and career pathways. I think what it really teaches us is to denaturalize the structures. So we often come to believe that the society we live in are naturally structured the way they are, but sort of scrutinizing and questioning and learning to see the structures and forces that we often don't see without having a sociological imagination. So that's something we come to learn. And very basic 3 skills, I think any sociology student sort of nurture over the years is critical reading, writing, and thinking ability. And those are invaluable. And I believe those are transferable skills to any sort of career pathways and job that you choose to do or pursue in future. So I'm just going to talk about quickly what are the key sociological skills that I personally found useful at workplace over the years from my experience of working with multidisciplinary research team. So the first obvious one is the research and analysis. We learn how to do research and analysis as a sociology graduate. The second important thing is communication. I think Luke already mentioned that being able to communicate with academic and non-academic audience, both are equally important, especially when you are thinking of exploring or extending your career outside of sort of academia. You have to learn and know how to communicate with non-academic audience. Though all my research role has been within academia so far, but we often work with different stakeholders, and we work for different government agencies. And I have authored or co-lead multiple different government reports where it's very important that we use that skill of communicating with non-academic audience, and how can we explain things in more sort of simplified way without using too much jargon, and how could we simply interpret the results and the findings, key findings. And I think another thing Luke mentioned, that unfortunately we spend a lot of time writing a really rigorous sort of detailed report, but when it comes to government flicking through our government agencies or the policy people flicking through our report, all they're interested in is the executive summary and recommendation. So I think this is I mean, we've got to be strategic when we are doing this kind of role or working for different government agencies, or there's a report commissioned by them, or working on some report that are for government agencies. We have to sort of figure out where should we focus our energy, and where should we invest that, because these are the important sort of aspects that will get more attention. And only, I think, people who are interested in actual research, not as sort of policy way, or just want to know what is this report is about, or the research is about, and how this research was done, they will probably read the whole thing, but very few, I can rest assure you about that. I think this next thing I found useful is the cross-cultural understanding. I mean, this is something we learn as a sociologist or student of sociology. I mean, we uphold and celebrate diversity, inclusion. We also learn about exclusion and marginalization, and I mean, understanding this cross-cultural perspective and global perspective in today's world, particularly in the society that we live in Aotearoa, is invaluable, no matter in what kind of job or sort of career pathways you choose to pursue. I think those kind of awareness and understanding will always be very valuable for you. And I think we are blessed with that kind of understanding as a sociology major or graduate. Teamwork or collaboration is also an important thing for me. I mean, yeah, you have to know how to collaborate with different people and people from different background within and outside of academia as well. People coming from a very, very different background and have a very different perspective on the same thing, and understanding and knowing how to sort of navigate that, and sort of there could be some kind of interpersonal conflict or issues that you probably have to navigate when you are working in a team or collaborating with people coming from very different backgrounds. So that's something I think as sociologists, we are well positioned to sort of nurture over the years through our discipline. Flexibility is also important. I think as I begin with, in the beginning, as I was saying, that we often tend to think of ourselves as sociology student or graduate and the sociology as a discipline in very sort of narrow way, which I think we need to change, or we need to look beyond like what we could do with sociology. So extending yourself as a critical thinker or critical writer or as a researcher is really important, without thinking that, okay, these are my limitation. I'm a sociologist, thus I will only be working with people from academia or from the discipline of sociology. I think that's that kind of boundaries we need to overcome. So flexibility is, I think, really important aspect. Think and act creatively. I think this is another very important and valuable skill we nurture as a student of sociology. We are always, from the first lecture in introductory sociology, I think we are encouraged to think outside of the box. So we are encouraged to be creative and acting creatively. So I think those are transferable skills that we already sort of nurture as a student of sociology, and we can actually use those things at our workplace. And finally, I'll talk about the reflective practice. Again, as sociologists, we value reflection, and we are taught how to reflect on our understanding of social problems, issues, and reflecting on the process that we have undertaken. So what could have been done differently or better? How can I justify my action? All this sort of very fundamental, basic reflective questions, or who could have been, whose voice has been heard, whose has been marginalized, and that kind of reflective question we often tend to ask as a student of sociology as well. So I think this is a transferable skill, no matter in which field you are working in. You can always choose to be reflective about the process that you are undertaking and about your research and the project that you are working on. So I think reflection is also a useful tool that we have in our kit as sociologists. So yeah, I think I'm happy to talk about this stuff further in the sort of Q&A or tips session. But yeah, that's all from me now.
Thank you so much for that, Ritu. I actually really resonated with your message, particularly around that narrow view of sociology. There certainly is a stigma, and the way I think that sociology is beautiful is that it is so much broader than that. It can translate across disciplines and skill sets. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. We will now hear from Dr. Casimir MacGregor.
You guys see that all right? Cool, good stuff. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for the ability to chat today, because I think it's really important, I guess, today to really, what we're trying to do is make visible the skills we have in sociology. It's one of those dirty little secrets. We often do our degrees and we don't talk about the things that we've learned, what are the skills we have. We often come to the end of our degrees and think, Jesus, what am I skilled at, It's often not as obvious, as if you did engineering or social work or some of these other disciplines. But believe it or not, we do have a number of skills, and that's why I think the presentations today really make that clear. So I think it's really important to give, you guys potentially, watching the video and here today who are thinking about where is sociology taking me? What are the careers available, to give you the language and the ability to think reflexively, as we mentioned before, about the skills that I have and the skills that I have to offer a future employer. Because the things I want to talk about today are things that I've noticed myself, applying for jobs, but also being on the other side of the fence, someone who's been on a number of committees, employing people from very junior to very senior people in my organization. So these are things I think to think about, that they work in practice. So one for me, a real big selling point for sociology skills is collaboration. We don't say that enough, even doing group projects on assignments, working with others to achieve shared goals is a number one skill that most people would want to put up there. And believe it or not everyone can do that. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that definitely social science, we almost, most of us are very good at doing this naturally. So again, making this a selling point, I think is really important. And again, that sociological viewpoint is important. We've already touched on it before, but we have the ability to think about multiple perspectives, how other people are very aware of, their position in society and how we can think cross-culturally and all those things. So again, that's a natural skill that we have that I think is really relevant. Another one, often we've already talked a lot about these, but I'll just go into a bit more detail about certain things. The one is writing. Not everyone can do it. You have a lot of engineering students and science students can't write to save their lives, but social science students especially have the ability to write very clearly, concisely, and editing skills are very highly valued. These are the things in the workplace that matter. We can write things to a high polished level that people can understand. And the other thing that sociology offers is the ability to write it registered. So what I mean by that is different kind of outputs for different means, so that everyone not necessarily is able to do so. So for me in my career, I've done journalism pieces, I've done academic papers, I've done technical reports, I've even found myself writing parts of websites, all these weird things that you didn't think you'd ever do. So I think our skills are really good for that. Another one there is also around oral communication. We often in our in education, when we do sociology, often, in tutorials, we speak up, we present, often we do group assignments, all these things. So these are really important skills that I'll talk a bit about later that we really should do. And I think the other thing we've kind of touched on before is that creativity. I think sociology gives that ability to pick things from different areas and present it in a cohesive narrative that people can make sense of it. Because the good thing about sociology, it's about, it's about the interaction between the individual with society. So it gives us that ability to change those registers. And I think that's, again, other disciplines really struggle with seeing the big picture, but also the micro. So it really gives us that ability to present ideas in an interesting way that other people can't. The other thing I got there is about interest-based discussion. So one thing we're very good at, I think, is being that reflexive, having that reflexive understanding of people's maybe backgrounds, where they're from. So it could be including people in discussions. It's trying to find the common ground with people. I think that's something that sociology really does well that others often struggle with. So I think, well, these are really good skills. And I think another one that I often use quite often is just thinking sociologically. That's a really good skill. In our organisation, we often think a lot about systems theory, systems thinking. And obviously, for my background in STS, obviously socio-technical thinking is quite key. But these are things we take naturally that others often can't think in systems. But for us, it seems very natural that we're going to think that way. And that's, again, I think being aware that we have something to add for that. And I think it is a really useful skill, not in terms of just research, but in terms of business, what you can add to a business. In terms of business strategy and management, these are actually practical skills that you'll use. You might not use the same language, but as soon as you make that connection, oh yeah, you're talking about a system. You're like, geez, you can talk often with the people in the higher management about business strategy, and you'll get what they're talking about because they're just basically doing sociology. They just don't use that term. I think Luke mentioned it before, it's about demonstrating the rigor. We're always constantly having to defend ourselves as a discipline. And I think that gives us good skills in terms of resilience, especially in your undergraduate. It's difficult to get a degree at university. So I think really acknowledging the things in your journey that you've overcome is a real good skill. I think the fact that you've come through, graduated and applied jobs, you should celebrate that, and it demonstrates great resilience, especially in our current times of COVID and Christchurch earthquakes and all these other things. So keep that in mind. It is a skill that is something you can bring that other people might not have, and you can actually actively demonstrate it through your work, because that's something I'll talk a bit more about later. Is in interviews, you often got to demonstrate from experience things that you've done. So it's about trying to bring in your experience into these things, which is quite critical. Another one, this is more into the dark arts of sociology. We shouldn't probably talk about these publicly, but I think these are really good skills we should acknowledge, is using sociological knowledge for your own gain. So for me, I often use sociological knowledge, for example, when I'm doing a stakeholder management plan. I often think, if I use Bourdieu's 4 capitals as a way to assess, if I'm looking at this in a very Bourdieuian way, who has the symbolic capital, who has the economic power, who has the social network. So it really helps you in your work to frame in your practice. So I think things like that are really useful. And the other one there is obviously that I quite like is obviously Goffman's impression management. We've got access to this knowledge, let's use it. And I think that's really useful. So, and I think impression management is really important, because how you come across publicly, or how you present, how you present yourself to the public, for thinking more that dramaturgy analogy, the front stage, this is the face you'll present to the employer. So you need to use these things for your advantage. So I think using these things are really critically important. And another thing, just going back to time management, one of the best things you can do when you're at university is try and do some kind of tutoring experience, because tutoring for me is a great skill set. I always use my tutoring skills all the time. It's just a great way to really hone your craft. I think gives you a real ability to test your ability to communicate ideas, to manage people, and also, I guess, especially managing difficult people. If anyone's been a tutor, you always got one in your class who's a complete pain in the ass. So I think it's just drawing upon the skills you have, I think, to really bring these home, because I think these are really, really important. And I think Luke and others touched on it before, is project management, actually acknowledging that doing a master's or a PhD is a big, complex project, and you should use that as an experience of project management, because that's what it is. I know with some of my PhD students and others, I kind of explain to them and get them to treat it like a meeting. They're driving it, they create an agenda, they're managing these things. So these are real world things that you will do in your normal life. So for me, these are just some of the skills to acknowledge. So for me, it's not necessarily learning new skills. I think for my advice to you guys looking for work is thinking about your existing skill set and your journey and trying to make clear what these are. So I guess things like today are to help you on your journey, to give you that visibility of what your skills are, because I think that's really important, especially as a sociology community, to acknowledge that you are learning great skills that are really useful going forward. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that, Casimir. I think your experience is completely valuable, both, like you said, on either side of the fence there. And I've really appreciated the way that you've interrogated some of those really key skills that you're right, that many of us as sociology students do actually have and have gained even just in our study. So thank you so much for that. Next, we have Dr. Aimee Simpson.
Kia koutou, everyone. I'm going to be the odd person out and not have slides. I can't believe I have been out of academia for 4 months and I've already given up on the slides. So that's, anyway. Yeah, okay. So when I was thinking about this, there was a couple of different thoughts that I had, and I was reflecting on some of the I guess anxieties that I had when I was finishing my PhD, or just even in it, to be honest, and thinking about where to next, like what am I going to do? And as for context, I come from quite a working class background, and so me having a degree was very kind of cool and novel to my parents, but they also didn't really understand that bit at all. And so I remember I defended my thesis, and I was in that sort of celebration thing, and I texted my dad to say, hey, like I passed, I'm a doctor, I was expecting like, woo, and he was like, oh, that's great, when are you getting a job? Like that was just the immediate sort of thing. And so there's this sort of thing around like kind of anxiety about like, what am I going to do with this? Where is this going? And especially with the way that the kind of academic landscape is, it feels like incredibly fraught, and like, what am I doing with this thing, and this thing that I'm very passionate about, where can I take it, where am I going to take it? So my thesis looked at, what a way to plug it, eh? My thesis looked at obesity discourses and the way that they inform how people understand their identities and bodies, and how they understand and conceptualize health. I now work as a senior analyst at MSD, and I particularly work in the employment space. So you might be asking me or yourself, is my PhD useful? And in what ways is it useful if it's not a one-to-one conversion of the subject matter? And explicitly, it doesn't seem that way, right? Like, I'm not going into meetings and talking about like the BMI, and I'm not going into meetings and I'm not talking about sort of the kind of medical interactions and why like we shouldn't be using this kind of metric and all that sort of stuff. But it has come up more often than I certainly thought it would. And that's been kind of interesting. So I'll get to that bit in a minute, but I just sort of wanted to set the context of that, even if you feel like you're doing an esoteric topic, that actually it still can be useful and will surprise you in the ways that it is useful. So in terms of the specific sociology skills that I bring to my job, looking at employment, technically, that's on paper what I'm employed to do. But I do two things technically as part of my job. One is that as a researcher, I am contributing to what's known as the future services model. So MSD is looking at introducing a whole new way in which it delivers services. And that's kind of exciting to be able to push the beast in a certain direction. And the other work that I do is I manage a longitudinal study known as Growing Up in New Zealand, which is funded by MSD, and actually Casimir Brands has done some work with them too. So that's a cool connection there too. And so as I was watching the other presentations, I was also thinking like, oh, I wonder if we're going to have any of the same skills. And yes and no. So I was kind of like, oh, okay, cool. I've got something to actually contribute to this conversation. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was that as a sociologist, you kind of learn about this thing called intersectionality, and you learn about the way that things are interconnected. And for me, that's always like, that's how I'm always thinking about stuff. I'm always thinking about the sort of the intersections of both people's lives, but also the way that it's like how those intersections produce different realities, and how they're like these sort of multiple forces that act upon people's lives. And I'm always thinking about things in that lens. And it seems like to sociologists, it seems like such an obvious thing to say, but a lot of people who work in government don't come from that same kind of background. They're not thinking about it in that same sort of way. They're thinking about sort of groups as being like siloed almost. They're thinking about students, they're thinking about elderly, they're thinking about working age people, rather than saying, well, you could be a student and elderly and technically working age, that you could be you could be occupying all of those spaces. So what does that mean to be like at the apex of several different vector points? What does that mean? And I found that that's been such a like almost fluent language of mine now, but that is such a foreign concept in some of the meetings that I have been in. I will say that not all of them. So I think that's one thing that I think is really like kind of underrated, but is such a strength, is to be able to see things in that kind of interconnected way. And then the other one I was thinking about too, in terms of the sort of the teachings of sociology, is about the link, the other kind of golden rule, that back to basics, as Ritu said, was about being able to see the link between history and biography. Because that's the other thing that I see a lot too in my new job, is that there's a focus on we have to change things, and there's a focus on the future, like where are we going, what are we doing, and no real acknowledgement about how we got there. And so it's always good when you have that kind of sort of understanding of the world to say, oh, well, history, like the present is informed by history, and to sort of see how like actually those things are very connected and are often ongoing in terms of the way that history is sort of replicated in the present. It becomes this really valuable tool to then go, oh, we're here, what is, and you immediately go, well, what is that connected to, right? And so it's those two things happening at the same time, right? Like, where did this come from? How did we get here? And that is just incredibly valuable. It also sort of lends itself to this kind of critical interrogation of existing research, because you're just not tied to sort of underlying assumptions. You know, you develop this sort of critical eye, and you can look at the research that you've been given and you're like, well, what are the underlying assumptions of this? Which can also be quite valuable in that sort of analyst position, because you're not married to anything necessarily. You're not committed to this sort of ideal, right? Like, you can kind of think out, they would talk about it being thinking outside of the box, but really it's about being able to look at a document and not take it at face value, and look at it and go, oh, how could we use this? Where could we take this? What does this actually mean? Where does this come from? And so in being able to do all of that, you're being able, the other skill that's, I think, connected to some of the things that Luke was saying around the research translation is around narrative building. Because if you can make those connections, and you can make the link to like what has been, what is, and what could be, that is building these kinds of really important narratives, which for people who don't have our training is how they kind of make a connection to research, right? It can be easy for us to read a document and go, oh, this is where this is going to go. This is how this is going to go. But actually, people who don't have that training need that spelling out for them. And so that storytelling and that ability to kind of draw it back to the real world, and to draw it back to real people, and to show how things are connected is really, really vital and valuable. I think the other thing that's kind of, it's not sociology related, but I think because sociology disciplines are often taught in the kind of tutorial style, it means that quite often you have a lot of teaching experience when you come out of a sociology degree, and the ability to kind of communicate to people who don't understand this. So that experience that you have from teaching first years sociology, and especially like when you've got the people who are there as a general education, the ones who are like looking at you like at what point is this going to be, they're looking for the gotcha moment. They're not there, like, and the process of having to win those people over is really valuable in terms of not only like your communication skills, but also the way that you can kind of essentially like politicize something and be very outcomes focused. You can think about it in terms of what are we trying to achieve here, and spelling things out for people in a way that will kind of convert them over. And these are all things that I actually didn't even think about as strategic skills. So if you ever see a job of, a job listing that says that they're looking for someone who is strategic thinking, this is the sort of stuff that they're really thinking about when they're saying that. I didn't think about it in that way. And it wasn't until my boss described me as a strategic thinker, and I was like, since when? That I realized that this is what it was coming from. It was coming from this ability to kind of draw something out and to lead people through a narrative, and lead people through this sort of a storytelling thing. So when people got to the end, they understood what you were saying, they were invested, and they could really see the sort of impact of something and why they had to do about it and why they should care about it. So that's it, I guess. And I guess to bring it back to the PhD bit, which is what I started with, is that it's come, like, the BMI stuff has come up actually in a lot of places that I didn't expect it would, and it's put me in in rooms with people where I'm sort of seen as an authority figure, which is also very bizarre coming as a student into spaces where they go, oh yes, you're an expert. And to get people to start thinking about especially sort of discrimination and kind of stereotyping and that kind of thing in like sort of multifaceted ways has been really rewarding. And also to like that training around, you know, dealing in a subject matter where people are very skeptical going in. So I think I'll leave it there. I'm sorry if that was a bit rambly, but.
Thank you so much for that, Aimee. I think for me, the things you've talked about have really described why I fell in love with sociology. The fact that it is, you know, that all those connections and all the ways that I view the world actually is a thing. And so I appreciated your rambles. Thank you so much for your time. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a 5-minute break. So please feel free to go grab a drink, have a moment, and we will all see you back here just before 4:30 for our interview and top tips session.
Hi, Brooke. Do you mind if I go first? Because some of the resources that I've got could be quite useful to continue the discussion.
Yeah, certainly.
Share my screen.
So Casimir is now going to share with us his resources on exploring top tips and effectively how we can all showcase and explain our skills in interviews or on your CV. I'll leave it with you, Casimir.
Cool, thanks guys. I think I want to start with these two because these ones are really big, because we've talked about a lot about, you know, the skills that I've got, but what kind of job do I want, right? So this little exercise I've got here is about trying to find your passion. It's called the Moscow analysis. So there's a bit of a matrix that you can fill out that kind of fills out, you know, you just could analyze, you know, the must-haves, the should-haves, the could-haves, and the won't-haves. So I think it's really important to think about the things that you're looking for to kind of in this job that you're looking for, because not just any job will do. I think that's the thing. You've got to be a little bit selective to think about the job you want and what it's about. And the other thing, I've got another link. All these links will be available in the show notes, so don't worry about them too much. It's just identify the goals, you know, the whys. What goals are important to you? What are you trying to do with your career? Where are you hoping to go and why? Because I think for me, definitely projecting, thinking about where you want to go on your journey is just as important as acknowledging your skills. So having an idea is really critical, because it's really hard to get a job if you don't really know what you want to do or how to do it. You could try, but you probably won't do too well. So those exercises, I think, are really kind of critical. Another thing for me is this website here, Jobs on Toast. It's run by a guy, Chris Humphreys. He did a PhD in medieval English literature, I think. He also, but now he works in the banking sector, but he's got a lot of great resources to think about. I reached out to Chris when I started my post-academic kind of thinking, when I thought, I don't really want to work in universities anymore. How do I go about transitioning out? So Chris was really helpful for a lot of advice. So feel free to reach out to him or go to his website or Twitter. He's quite useful. And he's got a little matrix there to help think about what your skills are and what kind of profession you want. So I think, again, really, I think, what have I got to offer? What do I want to go to? And using some of these resources to help structure your thought and structure your job search. Because not many times can you plug into Seek sociology and you get a direct hit. So it's trying to think about what is these other jobs out there that I could do. So this is what these exercises are about. And If you really want practical tips, give an example about where something happened and how you dealt it and whatnot, there's a wonderful YouTube channel by Madeline Mann, Self-Made Millennial. Check those out. They're excellent. And she's got a number of strategies about how you should structure your interviews, your cover letters, your follow-up and all that. Because the job search, unfortunately, is a bit of a strategy. You need a plan of attack. You need to keywords are used. So often, again, planning your interview is about having the narrative worked out. You have some examples that you can use and reuse time and time again. So you need to develop a toolbox that she talks about. So those are real critical. And they'll be helpful for other job and other things too. And also a strategy about what happens after the interview and you don't get a call back, I know I've gone through many times thinking, shit, should I call them back? Should I not? Is it too needy? How long? So you got to think about that. So check those out. They're wonderful resources. You can thank me later after those ones. And for me, this is another big one. It's just looking after your mental health when you're struggling. We've gone through a lot of times, COVID, especially while studying. But overall, think about the stresses that we all have. When you graduate, you're thinking about, oh shit, I really need a job. And you're dealing with many things. You're transitioning. Your friends might be moving to different cities, but really look after yourself. Really think about, how you're tracking on your journey. Those are too. It's really important to really reach out and sources. There's just one, for example, talking about undergraduate mental health. So there's quite a few around that we can make available, but do consider that an important thing to think about. So just in terms of tips and things like that, for me, I think the old days of when they'd say, oh, if you move outside of academia, there's no way of getting back. Well, that doesn't really hold up these days. It's very porous. There's a lot of opportunities for industry and academia to work together. And the increasing impact agenda of the science system in New Zealand and overseas makes that so. So I wouldn't be too concerned about things you might hear at university about, moving to the dark side of doing different things. That's kind of old school stuff. That doesn't really happen these days. So from my experience, I just wouldn't worry about it. Another thing for my top tip is just kind of having a positive mindset. This is really important. When you do get rejected, unless you're very lucky, I don't think I've ever met anyone that never has, just don't take it personally. It's not about you. It's often about the fit between the skills that you have, and it might be the business, it might be the culture of the workplace. There might be things that you don't know about that might go against you. So don't take anything ever personally. When it comes to jobs, it's just about all these things kind of have to align together. So that's, I think, really critically important. This is probably a bit more heretical. That might ruffle a few feathers, but ultimately your grades and that don't really matter. Publications, ultimately, they don't, unless you're applying for a postdoc or something like that, they might. So it's thinking about the skills and the mindset you bring are far more important than any of your grades that you might have. It's great that you might have got an A+ for, sociological theory, but in the workplace, things like that don't really matter. So it's about the skills and the mindset. These are critically important. And the other thing to think about is getting the job is only half of it. Once you do have the job, you have to navigate the workplace. So you've got to use your skills, your sociological knowledge to enable the socialization, getting well, getting along well with peers and all these other things, being a good human being, all these are critically important. Because not just getting the job, it's also staying on the job. So the other thing, as we talked about reflexive practice, is about how you work is just as important as what work you're doing. So things like efficiency, productivity, having your processes that you might have developed in your studies, good behaviors like that are critically important in the workplace. So you've got to keep on building on those. And another key thing is kind of just have a think about what is your career goal and kind of break that up into steps. I think that's really important. So there's no point just getting one job to the next and going here and there. You're not going to basically go anywhere if you don't have a journey or a goal in sight. It's really think about where you want to go, what you want to do. That's how you progress. So think about what success means to you. I think that's really important. Success is really relative. So for me, you know, I was an academic at Monash University, good university, working with some of the best sociologists in the world. Fantastic. But for me, I wanted to own a house in the city, because obviously Melbourne's quite difficult. Well, that's all relative, going to Wellington. But think about what success means to you, and it's only relevant to you. And another thing should guide you in the workplace is let your values guide you. Bullying and bad behaviours are never okay. So don't ever think because I'm junior or just starting out that I should accept this or think that's okay. If someone tries to be mean or puts unrealistic expectations on you or speaks out of turn, you know, you need to speak up and say something. That's never okay. So I would just have zero tolerance on that. It's never acceptable. So that's something to be aware of. Don't feel like you have to accept it just because you're new or starting out or don't have the confidence. Talk to a colleague you might trust or someone else. But yeah, I would really emphasize that. Don't ever accept it. Another thing is recognizing that the job hunt is two ways. So it's not just, you know, what I can do for them, but what can they do for you? How are they supporting you to reach your goals? So make that very clear when you're talking to people. There's a two-way conversation. It's not just one way. You're not there, you know, hoping, oh, please employ me. It's like, hey, what can you also do to support me in my development as a young
Casimir, you're frozen. Are you back with us now?
Yep. Sorry, did I go?
Are you back? Yep. No, your connection's been a little bit fuzzy.
That's no good at all. I've just finished with that end point. Is just develop your legitimate strangeness. So develop your unique capabilities and interests and skills and use that as a selling. I'll make those links available too. So when you guys put up the video, you can all access them.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Casimir. Luke, would you like to share your tips?
Sure. I didn't prepare lots of stuff like Casimir, but I'm happy to take questions through on this area. I think some of the important things I've been taking notes on relate back to everything that we've all been saying. I think it's really important when you write your CV. I think most people have learned how to write CVs. Actually, in Australian universities about 10 years ago, they started introducing mandatory courses on CV writing, and everyone had to do it before they could graduate. And I think that's kind of disappeared again. But I think the key thing to note is that what is an academic CV is very different to a CV for someone else. So I know in the past I've often had in my on my computer academic CV 2021, and next to that will be the non-academic CV 2021, and they're very much tailoring it for who you're talking to. And I've sat on employment panels where I've received CVs both in academic area and non-academic, and I've seen how you really do skim over anything that doesn't seem to be tailored. If there's a lot of irrelevant stuff in a CV for the job that someone's applying for, you kind of skip over it because you think, did they really read the position description? Did they really look at the key points? I think it's the same in New Zealand. A lot of jobs have all different things that they ask you to do when you apply. Some literally just say, send in a CV. Like the one I'm working in now literally just said, send in a CV. But they did have the key criteria mentioned, but they didn't want you to respond to it, which when you apply for a university, you respond to those key criteria in quite in-depth. So that was quite a challenge. So I remember literally trying to respond to the key criteria in the letter, because a lot of people forget to do a cover letter on their application. I did a cover letter and I responded to the key criteria. I think I reduced my font a couple of times in the letter. But apparently I later on heard that it actually helped, that they read it and went, oh, he clearly knows what the job is he's applying for. So there's skills, I think, in lots of areas, but in terms of non-academic jobs or non-university jobs, just knowing that there are key differences to how you present that stuff, including things like your publications, you know, and conference presentations. Like, we love doing that in university applications, but outside of that, really, they just want to see a few of them. They don't want to see your 3-page list of publications. So pick the ones that are actually relevant to that job, or just mention, I have published in a number of journals, including, and then write them out and things like that. But anything that's relevant. I think it's also important to, in an interview, go through what you've done that's relevant again, but link it to how that will benefit the role that you're applying for. So what is it that you've done that benefits that, and what you offer them. So I think a key thing to look out for too, and I was going to mention this earlier, but I didn't get to it, is that often you'll apply for jobs where the PhD is not something that is necessary. It's also something that may not be something that they've come across before. So knowing when to drop the doctor title is probably a little bit important. It is tough because you've worked hard for it, but not necessarily putting it always up front, because it will intimidate some employers. And I've worked in areas where it is a research area, some of those places I've talked about, where having a PhD isn't necessarily required for some of the higher research roles. So you might be reporting to someone who hasn't got a PhD, and if they're employing you to be their, I guess, research assistant or something on a project, they don't want you constantly saying, when I did my PhD, we did it this way. So making sure that they don't think you're going to do that in your interview is kind of key. So investigate the place you're applying for. Go and look at what they do, like find out those things. Like I'm sure you've got something equivalent in New Zealand, but here we have things like enterprise bargaining agreements, and you can go through, and usually here they're all publicly available generally, so you can read up everything, and it tells you things like employment roles and education levels, so you can see, well, do you have to have a PhD to have a particular role? If not, okay. Or get to know, look up people's profiles on LinkedIn and see, what backgrounds they have. I've actually applied for jobs where I think it was one of the more recent ones where they actually sent me everyone's LinkedIn links for the job, for who's going to be on the interview panel. And I thought that was a really great idea. So ever since then, I've actually started doing that myself and investigating, finding out who's on the interview panel. You can even ask sometimes. I have been knocked back for jobs, like Casimir was saying, so you need to sort of deal with that. And I've been knocked back for jobs and being told it's because you have a PhD. And that is the weirdest thing to be told, oh, you're overqualified for a job. And when that happened, I think the first time, I went back and reflected on it and thought, okay, well, how do I apply for the next job without them thinking I'm overqualified, but thinking I'm qualified enough? So putting some time into balancing that is really tricky. And again, sometimes you overthink it and you pull it off and you do it okay, but just trying to work out that not everyone is in the same space in terms of how great you are is kind of a challenge, I think. Also, assume people do not know what sociology is. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. I have been introduced as I think the funniest one I heard was someone introduced me as something as a sociopath, which had to quickly correct. No, it's a sociologist. I think I've heard fellow sociologists introduced as socialists. That's kind of amusing too. So people don't always know what sociology is, and be ready to explain it if they ask, because it has come up in interviews where someone said, so what is this sociology that you've done? And being ready, and usually they'll say, well, what's different to that in psychology? So being able to quickly explain that one. I'll let others go as well, but I did want to, I've got a couple of things I wrote down here too. I guess also linking in for that translation stuff. So one of the jobs I applied for, I do ask sometimes, if you get a job, after you've started, maybe wait till your probation period's done. I don't know if you guys have set probation periods there, but asking the person who employed you, what was it? Why did you employ me? What did I do well? So then you can keep that in your memory bank for the next time you need to do it. And I remember one time asking, and they said, oh, it was all about the translation. They said, we had lots of people apply who've done PhDs, and they just said, I did this, but then they never said what they did with that. And they said, you've come here to work at a private organization. We want someone who's able to do research, but then show us and follow through with translating it. And so being able to demonstrate that. So if you haven't done that before, that's something I would plan into your PhD, plan in some time at the end of your PhD to translate it and have something tangible. You can go, look what I did with it. I did this after I did my PhD, I turned it into this. So yeah, I'll throw over to whoever's next if they want to, and feel free to ask me questions too.
I'm going to throw a small spanner. Thank you so much for those tips, Luke. I'm just going to throw a small spanner. I respect that you will be leaving us very soon. So what I would like to do is to change up the program, open up the floor now for anyone who would like to ask Luke any questions specifically, and then we don't miss out on those gold nuggets at 5 o'clock. Does anyone have any questions for Luke? Have we had any in the chat, Eva? Have you had any?
No, I haven't had any just yet.
Also, if people are watching the recording, I don't mind if you send me an email too if you want to ask stuff. So feel free to do that.
If no one else is going to go, I do have one for you, Luke. Thank you for sharing all your insights. I also really resonated with kind of like the dynamic that, or more so the fence that you have to sit on when you're crafting your CV, and that you want to, you know, showcase all your skills, but you don't want to come across as overconfident or cocky or an overachiever or something like that. So I really resonated with that. But I did have a question with something you said at the start in terms of media skills. I was just wondering if you could unpack that a bit in terms of, you know, what skills have you found valuable there? Are there particular ones that you would suggest that we hone into? Yeah, how to use media skills as a sociologist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something, I mean, I was lucky because before I entered into sociology and into my PhD, I'd done lobbying work in another lifetime for LGBTI rights. And so you're thrown in front of the camera quite a bit. And I had that happen to me at a young age, and you make mistakes and you learn from them. But I think then I started to get, after that, it was a bit late, but then I started to get, particularly when I started doing my honours, I think it was, I was able to do some media training, and I can't remember where I found it. I think it was like something the university offered, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll sign up for that. And it was really, really helpful because I really do think as researchers, sociologists aren't the best at doing it. I think, well, at least in Australia, I don't know what it's like over there when you watch the news. I don't know whether you see sociologists brought on the television to answer social questions all the time, but here they generally bring up psychologists or historians or just random influencers to talk about the current news. I watch European news on cable, and they always have sociologists, and I think they do it really well. If you go to international conferences and meet Europeans, they're all on top of that. And I think it helps then when you're applying for other jobs, because in this day and age, people can Google you and they'll find a media comment or something. And you want to make sure that you said the right thing so that when they Google you and you're applying for a job, you haven't said something that damages you down the track for jobs. But also it demonstrates that you're able to communicate to a wide audience, because communicating research and some of these concepts is really tricky to navigate. My PhD was on separated same-sex parents. So you can imagine when Australia had the big vote on whether or not to have marriage equality, trying to communicate that to the media without it ending up on the front page of a tabloid that, you know, random gays divorce, how shocking. And how you navigate that is tricky. And there was definitely times during that when I was doing my PhD that I was contacted by media and trying to pick through, do I really want to do this interview? Is it really? And a few times I said no. And then other times I went through and really navigated it before I did it. So I really think they're really helpful skills, because then those same things you then apply in an interview when you're going for a job. It is kind of like sitting in front of the media. You're sitting in front of a job panel, and they drill you the same way. So yeah, I hope that answered the question, Nicole.
Fantastic, thank you. Luke, was there anybody else with any questions? What we can also do is, if you think of something later, we can grab them in the chat and we'll flick them through to Luke, and we can facilitate those connections too as well. And because Luke does need to go soon, can we have our mics off, please? And will you join me in just saying thank you to Luke before he goes? Thank you so much, Luke.
Thanks, everyone. I'll hang around until I have to run to my next meeting.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Let's go to Ritu. What were your interview top tips?
Thank you, Brooke. To be honest, I think everything has been said and covered by Casimir and Luke. I'll probably be sort of repeating myself if I say something. But yeah, just to sort of reiterate, I suppose, or emphasize that fact that be very clear about what kind of job or career pathways you are sort of pursuing or sort of applying for. Like be very clear, as Luke was saying earlier, that I had the same sort of two folders. One is for academic CVs, and other one was for non-academic CVs. So it's very different the way you tailor your CV. Obviously, if you're going for a research-based academic job, then it has to be more focused on your previous research experience, your publication, your conference, that kind of stuff. Whereas if something else, for example, if you're going for some kind of policy, advocacy, community engagement, that kind of work or job, I think focus needs to be more like your communication skills, and you have worked as an advocate, if you have done many advocacy work previously. So that kind of skills, I think, will be more valuable to highlight in CV, both in CV and cover letter as well. So it's really sort of matter of finding that balance, or understanding that obviously they're reading the job advert really, really well, understanding what are the key skills and responsibilities mentioned there, and highlighting that. Make sure your CV and your cover letter sort of reflects those things. And going back to like, okay, which skills I have would be more relevant to the job description, which one I should highlight and which one I should sort of underplay, based on that, I think is the key. Another thing Luke mentioned is that researching the interview panel, looking them up, research about the organization you're applying for. I mean, it would be useful to know. Sometimes there are information about their key stakeholders, who are their key stakeholders, who they work with, what kind of work or research they have done previously, to know all the sort of those information will be very handy to prepare yourself for the interview. Other than that, obviously, as I said, looking up the panel who would be in that interview. For interview, I would say two things that previously had worked for me. One is, I think, giving moderately sort of long answers, but be precise. So don't do a one sentence answer like, so what's your strength, or like, what makes a good collaborative team? And just don't say that you need to have mutual respect, and don't stop there. Like, explain what you mean by that and give a good example. It's a good story. Everyone likes a good story. So I think having some examples also demonstrate that you have work experience which you can draw on from, and that would be useful and sort of interest them as well. The panel would appreciate that. I think that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else which I could add to, but yeah, happy to take any questions if there is any.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ritu. I think you've added plenty into that discussion, so thank you for that. Aimee, did you have any extras that you wanted to chuck in there?
I've got a couple. So I think one thing to think about is like that your CV is like your data basically, and the cover letter is like how you are selling it. And so you've got all of the components and basic bits in your CV, but your cover letter is how you kind of bring those bits to life. So especially if you're feeling like you don't have maybe a lot of work experience, or you feel like you're maybe stretching what you're doing. So for instance, for me, like I was going from a lot of academic stuff and then moving into public sector. And even though I was technically still applying for a research role, I was thinking, well, I actually have way more teaching experience than I have research experience. In that cover letter, you're able to kind of draw out those skills and really like sort of show how you're, you know, bring those things to life where they might be a bit more muted in your CV. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about too is that if it's a job, like if you're going into an academic job for one, or then your supervisor is useful, is to either use your supervisor or a mentor of yours that you have whose they will give you critical feedback. So you don't use one who always just is like, oh, this is great. You want the one who will be ruthless and redline things for you. So I did this when I applied for an academic job that I didn't get, but I actually sent my cover letter and my CV to my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, and he went through and he redlined it. Like he went through and copy edited my whole thing, and it was a learning experience, but a really useful one, actually, because there was all of these things that I was underplaying, and he was like, nah, you got to really do this, like amp up this bit, amp up that bit. So if you can do that, if you feel comfortable doing that, I really recommend doing that, because it'll teach you a lot about actually how other people see you and what skills that you have that you're undervaluing and underselling. So that's a practical tip. When you get to the interview stage, if you get to the interview stage, know that means that they want you, like they're interested in you. So quite often some of the stuff that stops you from getting to an interview is that actually they might already have a preferred candidate. So that whole phrase around like, it's not you, it's me, like it's usually not you. Often they'll have like a couple of people in mind. And sometimes that comes down to who you know. So sometimes also having those networking opportunities and knowing people who work within the organization who can, or in a similar organization or have worked in a similar field, who can give you some insight that can really help you. And two, like also don't be shy about being shameless. If they have like the hiring manager's email, have like a really lame excuse to email them and ask about the role, because then you're putting your name in front of them and you become like familiar. And it's a really, like, as I say, it feels really kind of sly, but people email them questions all of the time and they don't see it that way, but they will remember your name and that you asked an insightful question, so it shows that you're interested. So if you get to the interview stage, I didn't do this, but I heard about this later, is if you can have like an interview on Zoom, you have all of this real estate that happens behind your computer where you can have your CV or like post-it notes with specific examples and all that sort of stuff. And then you can look very kind of contemplatively and like you're thinking things through, and what you're doing is you're perusing all of your examples and finding one that works for the question that they've asked. So I heard that someone had done that for a job that I didn't get, and I was like, oh, they're a genius. They deserve that job. But like that's such a simple tool to do in an e-interview setting. And also thinking too, but anyway, even if you don't do that, the specific examples, as Ritu was saying, is really, really critical, because then you can kind of, you can say, oh, yes, I'm good at this, and this is exactly where I've done this. I would remember too, like people have said this to me before and I didn't believe it when I was in a student, so you should believe it. But if you're getting to an interview stage as well, you're also interviewing them It's not just them interviewing you. You're also seeing like, do I want this job? Do I want to work with you? And so you can ask, like, if they have that portion at the end of, do you have any questions? Ask some really insightful questions about things that would, like, you know, be personally meaningful to you, or, you know, values-based meaningful to you. Like, what is your, you know, position on that? How will you support these kinds of stuff? Like, all of those kinds of things. And you're totally within your right to put people on the spot, but it shows that you're invested in thinking about yourself in that role and things that would matter to you if you were in it. And that sort of suggests about knowing your worth too. So especially for women and gender diverse people, whenever they offer you money, always go for more. Never settle. Always go for more. That was something that a mentor of mine taught me. Always ask for more. You can always negotiate. And yeah, I think the other thing too is that the interview setting is just like an opportunity, maybe a cure for the overqualified thing, is if you're personable. And so just letting your personality shine and being like kind of genuine and kind of conversational and interested, because they're looking often to see if you would fit in a team dynamic and work well with other people. So if you can sort of show that you can do that, and kind of have that sort of easy human connection, then they go, oh, okay, you would fit in this environment, even if your skills aren't a perfect fit or you have things to learn, because you can teach people skills. It's hard to teach people like to be likable, really. I think that's it. I think that's all I've got. I'll shut up now.
That was fantastic, Aimee. Thank you all for sharing your tips. I've been in the same role for 7 years, and so I know that my CV and my cover letter are quite stagnant, and I'm really looking forward to putting some of these tips and seeing what I can bring to life. So thank you so much. We really do appreciate that. We are now almost bang on time to move into our Q&A session. So I will open up the floor again. Please do raise your hand, chuck it in chat, if you would like to ask our speakers anything.
I have one question. It's quite broad, so you can sort of take from it or take whatever angle you would like. But I find that cover letters are an interesting type of thing, trying to communicate who you are through sort of an A4 document. So do you have any sorts of suggestions or things that you think are important to include or effective, just from your own personal experience or what mentors have told you?
Yes, I could say a couple of things, Eva. So I guess, you guys all right? Can you hear me all right? Yeah, I guess some of the key things is just make sure that you address the essential selection criteria. So often you see in a job, you got essential, you got nice to haves and all that. A key thing is to parrot the language back that they've used in the job advert and the job description. So making sure that the keywords are used in your letter that have been used in the job application, that's critical. And the other thing I think is just give a sense of who you are. What I mean by that is you should kind of write it in terms of how you see yourself as an organization, like what you would bring to it. So you'd, for example, if you do an academic one, you talk about, contribute to these courses and these type of things. But if you're doing another one, it's just, doing your research and trying to find a way to wangle that insight into your letter, just to kind of prove or demonstrate that you know something that hasn't been, knowable. But it's just keeping it short, concise, being very clear about your value add, I think. Cover letters are probably the hardest of all the things you have to write, because that's the key thing that gets you the interview and all these other things. So in some respects, it's the hardest. So it takes many times, and people underestimate the time it takes to write a good letter. Just think how long it takes and probably triple it. The more you spend on a good cover letter, the the better it's going to be. There's one thing, sometimes I haven't done too well at interview, but then I've always had excellent comments about my cover letters. So the cover letter can also determine if, you know, they should talk to you or not. So don't underestimate it. If you do a really good one, it will get you into the door. So I'd really encourage people to put a bit of time into it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Casimir. I will just slightly piggyback off that. I've been developing my CV over the last week or two, and I now have quite seriously 2 different CVs. And they're not for different types of jobs, they are different color schemes. And it sounds really superfluous, but to me, it's really important that I give all of who I am. So I have one of my CV versions is, yep, there's bright pink accents and everything, and then the other's quite bland and boring. I developed the second because it was highlighted to me that maybe that was actually putting people off. And because I'm applying for roles in spaces that are not creative, you might get away with that as a, you know, web developer or something. Has anyone had any experience where they've found something really that was them that may have turned someone away from their CV?
Oh, look, I've seen quite a few reviewing CVs. So I think how your CV is presented is just as critical as what you have on it. So that's why I always would tell people, you know, avoid putting photos on CVs. It just gives you another reason, you know, in terms of ethnicity and others that, you know, I get that with a funny name. I get a lot of non-replies, but if you kind of slightly do an initial, I get a different response than if I write my name out. So you've got to be very aware of these things. Same with hobbies. I would always tell people don't put things like hobbies on your CV. Can send sometimes the wrong message, just keep it professional. Same with obviously citizenship, but more personal details. You don't really need those kind of things. And other things like keeping things local. So for phone numbers, don't put, you know, 64, then your area number, just keep it local. You're a local person. I think those things are really critical. Just kind of demonstrate that you're a local and doing stuff. But how it looks is very important. So don't use cute emojis, don't use images.
I think another thing is probably keeping it tidy and simple and not put too much formatting. That could be sometimes off-putting for some people, because I've seen CV with like where too much formatting is going on, too many different kinds of fonts or like italics and bolds, and it's just start to sort of look like a chaos going on. So I think it's probably better to avoid that kind of ornamental stuff as much as you can.
Yeah, I think funnily enough, like actually, I mean, if you want, I can show you 2 different CVs of mine if you're interested. This feels like you have to enable me to screen share, but it's just funny actually. Like I think that presentation is huge, especially if you're looking at going into like any kind of like job where you might be required to like write or produce a document or whatever. Like I think it shows a level of like attention to detail. I also say this about your thesis as well. I know this isn't about like thesis writing, but I think that if your thesis looks good and the formatting is beautiful, it has there's sort of the subliminal thing that suggests that you were calm and collected when you submitted because you had all this time to work on the formatting, and it kind of relaxes your examiner and they come into it not worried. Whereas I think when they look at a document and the presentation is perhaps not what they were expecting, or not like professional, you're not going in looking like this is a published book. They're not getting that subliminal messaging around this is a published book. So let me show you, I'll show you my, so this is my academic CV. And it's not using the university template because I think it's horrendous. You should be able to see it out. Can you see it or no? Oh, what am I doing? Select the screen. Oh, I have to click the button share. Ugh. Okay, so this is my academic CV. It has way more detail in it than it ever had any business of having. But I used color. I think it's like a relatively like nice layout, whatever. There's way more, so this stuff, these are tips that I got from my supervisor about having feedback from my examiners on my about my PhD thesis, who it was supervised by, who it was examined by, if you had any like awards associated with it. It just it makes me cringe, but you know, there you go. So you'll note too that in my academic CV, I use the surname Simpson. I also have my Twitter handle there too, because like being a public academic is also a thing. What you'll notice is for the CV that I use to get my current job in the public sector, I don't have a Twitter handle there. I also use my married name, which is what I go by outside of academia. So there you go. And you'll see that there's none of that guff in there. Like the education section is like really short. The personal statement is really a lot short, and then it's straight into kind of the employment experience. But I used the same template, and that's just because like I'm quite a colorful person, and I just like a good looking document. So the difference in terms of pages is this one is 4 and the academic one is 6. So it's like way more involved, way more writing. It's just nonsense really, I think. Whereas this one is all of that middle stuff is all kind of cut out. And then because I was applying for a research job, I had all of the presentations and stuff in there, but you wouldn't necessarily have that in there. So hopefully that's kind of helpful.
Incredibly. Thank you so much for that. Were there any other questions at all?
I have one for you, Aimee, because I think what you were saying about, you know, an interview is actually an opportunity for you to interview the employees is something that's so important. And I don't think that gets given enough consideration. Yeah, like I've ended up in a job before where I didn't have that knowledge or even think to do that. And I ended up in a really horrendous workplace where I ended up having to leave because it was just such a toxic place. And it was only in the aftermath of that and getting older and learning new things and stuff that I reflect back on that interview, and there were so many red flags in that interview. But of course I was, you know, young and just really keen to get a job, so I took it. So what are like some kind of like red flags that you look out for in that sort of thing to keep your mental health in a good place, and to kind of, I don't know, seek out that workplace environment that gels best with your personality and who you are as a person?
So I mean, sometimes it can be hard for the like in the interview setting, because obviously it's a very contrived situation. You're not seeing the whole thing, and then you're also getting that person's perspective on it as well. So that's always interesting too, like getting that insight again as to like, oh really, this is how you see this place? That's fascinating. But you always get that reflection after the fact, right? So I think there's some, but you could ask questions around like what they do to what investment they have in team building, what they do to ensure that there's kind of like, what do they do for fun? Like, I think that that's a legitimate question. It's not work related, but like it kind of shows if they have an investment in the team sort of sticking as a cohesive unit, like, and if they kind of like stumble and go then that's a bit of a red flag, because it shows that people just show up and work and they have no kind of interpersonal relationships at all. I think too, if there's things that about like sort of your identity or your history or like things that are really important to you, to ask a question about that. So you can say like, you know, what does your organization, what do your team do? Like I would also ask about the team too. So like, for instance, MSD has like 10,000 employees. So you want to know about what they're doing at the level at which you're going to be working. But it's good to know about an organizational level too. So you can say like, what do you guys do for like queer staff? What do you guys do for parents? What do you guys do for disabled staff? You know, what are your, you know, so, or things that are worthwhile. What is your opinion on flexible working arrangements? What is your like approach to this? Like, and ask them these sorts of like, you know, what is your development plan? Like, how do you develop your staff? Because that's the other thing too, is you don't want to get a job where they give you a bunch of work and don't develop you, you know, and don't give you opportunities. So these are all kinds of things about, if you're thinking about what you hate about a work environment and what made it bad, to then almost turn that around and go, oh, actually, it was really bad because I was in this like, you know, super like sexist, you know, environment or whatever. So then you ask like, what do you do to support like women, like female staff? What do you do to like ensure that staff feel like protected, what like, and valued? And you can ask those questions. And like, if they don't give you a good answer, you can be like, okay, you either take that as like a risk that you're willing to accept, because I think it's totally valid to take a job because you just want a job and you want security. Like that's totally valid reason as well. Especially coming out of like a precarious academic environment. Like if you just want like job security for a little bit after you finish your PhD and like time to breathe, that is totally like a valid reason too. So yeah, think about like your horror stories and then almost turn it around about like what would have made that situation better, and then just ask them. And if they kind of, yeah, as I say, if they flounder, then you go, ooh, maybe not you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Were there any other questions? I do actually have one for Casimir. Are you still around? Is your internet back?
Hopefully.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier about the fact that you can apply things like sociology across business, for example. One of the areas that I'm really interested in going into is analysis. And I know that that's a very IT-based kind of space. And so I don't have a business information. I don't have the IT background. I've got sociology. How and what kind of ways do you think that we can kind of prove that these are the things that we have and this is how we can do it if we don't have those previous knowledge?
Yeah, I guess it's about, well, tap it into that knowledge base. So when you think about something like IT or analysis or data analysis, what's the key thing is your skills give you the ability to provide the wider context, you know, because data needs a context. Data is about telling a story. So part of what you're about is acknowledging the skills around how you can tell the story of the data within that context. So it's your value add. So someone, for example, might have done computer science and can do the data, do these fancy things, but what you can do is do that, but then you can add the story. Well, you know, if you look at this and compare to that data set, then we can look at the trends, the wider trends, and link it back to the widest kind of social context, you know. So I think it gives you the ability to make those connections. I talked previously about, you know, about ideas bridging, the connections between different fields of thought to provide that insight. So that's kind of what sociology brings. So it's just trying to link it back, you know, because you know, I don't want to get too theoretical, but you think about Bourdieu, we all inhabit, you know, sociological habitus or habities, depending on how many there are where you have. So it's just tapping in, trusting your judgment and thinking about how would I explain this to someone else? I guess that's the thing. It's not making sure you second guess yourself or saying you don't have something relevant, just trusting yourself. Hey, look, what if we did this or we did that? And over time, you'll see that people will value your expertise because you're providing insights that they or the team doesn't have. So yeah, I just think, just give it a go. I don't think there's no right or wrong answers. All the times that I, you know, just try things is just, you know, just be yourself, share the thoughts that you have, and 9 times out of 10, they'll probably be valued. Not every time, just 9 times out of 10.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that, Casimir. Any other questions from our attendees at all?
Guess I just got a final tip. I would encourage people just use their networks. As Aimee said about the job market, I think that's critical, especially academic jobs. You know, my favorite one is actually asking them if it's actually a real job, because a lot of these ones, there's a hidden curriculum out there. You know, there's hidden things, hidden agreements. Just make sure that it's real. And I think outside academia is maybe just talk with a recruiter. That could be one of your first steps. Have a chat with them, see what the job market's like, see if they got any tips to follow up on. They'll give you an assessment on where your skills might fit. They'll give you a very objective assessment about where you are. And often recruiters are good because they can be the intermediary when you're talking about your pay and other things. So that's a nice thing to do, is actually use and be strategic. Like Aimee said, don't ever accept the first offer. I always use my student loan as an excuse. I want to pay off my student loan, blah, 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 so I need this much money. So don't ever give them a ceiling, just give them a bottom, what you won't accept.
Fantastic.
As much as they want.
Thank you so much for your tips there, Casimir. I think I've probably asked everyone to sit in uncomfortable silence enough now. So please, if you do have any other questions, you're more than welcome to send them through to us, chuck them in the chat before you go, and we will find a way to get them back to you. So we have come to the end of our session, and to finish, I would like to share with you some information about the association that is currently supporting our series. So SAANZ is a not-for-profit association that aims to promote all things sociology in Aotearoa. With members coming from a range of backgrounds, it is a great source for networking, discussing important societal issues, finding out about events, and being informed of current research. If you have found that the seminar has provoked a fascination or a passion or an interest in sociology, I would really encourage you to join. Student membership is only $10 a year. It gives you access to support to attend our conference, scholarships, newsletters, competitions, a whole lot of different things. And I will ask Eva to throw the link if you would like more information into the chat below. So next month, we will be joined by Alan Davison, who is currently a senior policy analyst at the Electricity Authority, working on ways that New Zealand can get the best value from renewable energy. Thank you, Eva. The seminar will be happening on Wednesday, the 3rd of August from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. So we're going back now to our hour-long sessions. As you're aware, our sessions are open to everybody. Please forward the invite to any other students or friends that you have. Ultimately, our goal is to empower and inform as many students as we can through these events that we are running. Please finally join me in saying thank you by a round of applause for our speakers. We have really appreciated your time and support for our students. And I'd like to thank everyone who has attended tonight as well. Thank you so much.